Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Good to see everybody. Hope you are all having a really good day. I'm really excited for this interview. I've been looking forward to it for quite some time. Unfortunately, Kevin had to postpone previously, but we got here today. So without further ado, I would just like to get straight into it because I'm itching to go. So please welcome Mr. Kevin Knuth. Kevin, how are you?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much for being here. Like I was just saying, I've really been looking forward to speaking with you. I think you have a very important voice in this subject, and yeah, I've been saying for quite some time that I believe the scientific community is really important to the direction of the UAP issues. So yeah, let's jump straight into it. I wondered if you could just start off by just giving us a bit of a background on yourself.
A background on myself, certainly. Let's see. I have a PhD in physics, and I've basically followed a very random course through my studies. I have lots of interests, and I'm easily distracted by interesting things. So I've my the so when I first my PhD was focused on studying magnetic fields generated by the brain, and from there I went and did postdoctoral research in neuroscience, and um, I learned about several data analysis techniques while I was studying neuroscience. And then later I got sucked into astronomy. A good friend of mine, I was actually at a neuroscience conference in Washington D.C. and one of my friends, who is an astrophysicist, was visiting her, and her husband is an astronomer, and we were having dinner the day of the conference, and he came home very frustrated because he was designing what's called a Fourier transform spectrometer, and he was going to use this to look for um, shifts in spectra due to Doppler shifts due to
Right.
motion of stars due to planets orbiting them. He wanted to find Earth-like planets, and he had designed this Fourier transform spectrometer and was having problems analyzing the data from that. So it just happened that I was able to help him with that, and I asked him what was wrong, and he went through it, and I said, "Oh no, you should actually do it this way. This would be much better and will almost certainly work." And after dinner, he ran upstairs and coded it, and and within a half hour, he came down all excited that it was working. And so we ended up co-authoring a paper together on the that instrument and that work, which was great fun. And then he enticed me to go with him to Kitt Peak in Arizona to go observing of planetary nebulae, and and he wanted to do that. I found out sometime later because his wife was pregnant, and his child was due when he was supposed to be in Chile at Cerro Tololo observing, and
Right.
he was hoping that I could do that for him, and so he offered to send me to Chile to observe at Cerro Tololo, which is a twin observatory, like Big Kitt Peak. It's the southern hemisphere
Right.
analog. So, I mean, who says no to that? You know, you get to
Yeah.
go to observe at a big 3 meter telescope in Chile, and it's a free trip, and you have to do some work, but that's worth it. So, so I got pulled into astronomy, and then ended up applying for a job at NASA Ames Research Center in the Intelligent Systems Division, and I took that position. So I was at NASA Ames for 4 years in the early 2000s, 2001 through 2005. And then in 2005, I took an assistant professorship here at UAlbany. So I've been here at UAlbany studying in the physics department for 16 years now. So quite some time. And my research now mainly consists of um, detecting and characterizing exoplanets, and and I do some work in quantum theory, and I had done some robotics for a while, although that I've kind of left that go so that I could take on other things like UAP research. So
Excellent. Well, we're certainly glad to have you on board, that's for sure. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to Dolan's Bar. Thank you so much for the kind donation. That always goes back into the show and keeps me being able to do this. So thank you very much. So when did your actual interest in the UFO subject come about? Is it something from way back, or is it something, you know, that you've just gradually come into?
A little bit of both. I was, let's see, I'm just the right age that I was 12 years old when Star Wars came out. So it was a magical event, you know, seeing this movie. It was groundbreaking at the time, and really inspirational. And at that time also, so I was a big sci-fi fan, of course, as a 12-year-old boy. And at that time, the TV show In Search Of was running with Leonard Nimoy was the host. Yeah. And they often had UFO cases on In Search Of. So I always found those interesting. And so I was interested in the topic. And when I went to graduate school, I grew up in Wisconsin and moved to Montana for graduate school at Montana State University in Bozeman. And the first 2 weeks or so of being there, which would have been in early September of 1988, there was a cattle mutilation in Bozeman where 2 cows were killed. And now that I know more about cattle mutilations, it was a classic mutilation. They're very bizarre, but This is the first I'd ever heard of such a thing. And of course, the people on the news were rather freaked out about this, and there were UFO sightings the night before. And the 2 prevailing theories were that it was aliens or Satanists. And so the new physics students who had just moved to Montana were all gathered in the hallway discussing this crazy thing because we'd never heard of cattle mutilations before. And I think the main concern was, what kind of place have we just moved to? You know, we've just committed to spending the next 5 to 7 years of our lives here. And what kind of place is this where cows can't be safe in a pasture? So we had this heated discussion about, you know, why would aliens do this and how would Satanists do this? And then there were of course, the side discussions about whether they could be alien Satanists. I mean, you might as well combine the two, right? I mean,
why not?
So it was a crazy, excited discussion in the hallway, and certainly we're being very loud. And one of the professors came out of his office to see what was going on and came down the hall. And when we told him what was happening, he suggested that he said, "Well, that's a very strange thing." Sorry, I'm getting delivered a drink here. Thank you.
No problem.
So I can keep my voice up. Yeah. So he said, "Yeah, these cattle mutilations are very strange. Yeah, they happen, and no one ever quite figures it out. No, you know, very often there's UFOs sighted, so that's very weird." And then he said, "But you know what's really strange is," he said, "I have friends who are in the Air Force, and they work up at Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is in northern Montana.
Yeah.
And they have problems there with UFOs flying over our nuclear weapons sites and shutting down our nuclear missiles, shutting down the ICBMs." And to be honest, at the time, we listened politely, and when he walked away, we laughed our asses off because that's craziest thing I've ever heard, right? And
yeah,
how would you not hear about this? How could this be happening and no one says anything? No one looks into it. No one studies it. And that was my thinking at the time. I mean, I thought this can't possibly be true. It is just ridiculous. So it wasn't until I was here at Albany and I was preparing a lecture on astrobiology for my astronomy class. And some of the students had asked about possibilities of aliens visiting Earth and UFOs and things like this. And so So it was the night before that class, and I was poking around the internet trying to find something intelligent I could say about aliens and UFOs and the possibilities of them visiting Earth. And of course, the internet is the appropriate place to look, right? I'm being sarcastic. and so I'm just poking around, just trying to get some ideas, right? And how can I approach this, from a reasonable perspective without just shooting the idea down, because it's not obvious that it's necessarily ridiculous. So I then stumbled on the press conference that Robert Hastings had held at the National Press Club, where he had 6 people from the Air Force or contractors who were talking about their encounters with UFOs at nuclear weapon sites, with them shutting down nuclear weapons. And I was blown away, because I thought, my God, I heard about this 30 years ago from a physics professor who knew people at the time who were having these problems. So he claimed this was going on in the late 1980s, right? But then you have Robert Salas here talking about his encounters with these things in 1966 or 65, mid-60s, 20 years before. And I thought, you don't have professionals like this, don't have legends and myths that last more than a couple 20 decades.
Right.
20 decades is a long time for there to be some crazy story floating around about. And I thought, this can't be crazy. This has to be real. And the fact that, in listening to their stories, it really just dawned on me that, or it was, just really cemented in the fact that because this is thought of as so ridiculous, no one paid any attention to it. And that's why no one's treated it seriously or done anything. And it really impressed upon me the fact that this could be a really serious problem. And we don't know anything about it. We're as knowledgeable about UFOs today as we were in 1947, it seems. Talking to people like Lou Elizondo and this privately, it doesn't seem like we know that much more than we did in the 40s, which is really pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've been doing quite a lot of work. Oh, I'm actually getting a bit of feedback now. Are you able to grab your headphones at all?
It will take me a moment.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's coming back at me now.
I'll be back in a moment.
Thank you. Sorry, everybody in the chat. We did a little test before the interview and everything sounded all right, but I'm getting some serious feedback right now. So please bear with me. I'll just quickly shout out the Signal. The Signal, Dan has got a amazing fundraiser up at the moment. The link is there. Go and check it out. You can win a signed Lou Elizondo poster, an NFT, and the highest donor gets a personal phone call from the man himself. So go and support that. It's for 2 incredible causes. So, yeah.
All right, here we go. Headset is coming.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oops, I just removed my mouse dongle, which isn't helpful. There it is.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
Excellent. Absolutely fine. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Yep.
So, yeah, let's jump into a little bit of your actual work and research when it comes to this subject. First of all, could you talk about the reasons why you think interstellar exploration is not uncommon?
Why it's not uncommon. I don't know. I guess it's mostly from our experience that humans are naturally explorers. So I think that, we've explored every corner of the globe. Corner, globe, flat Earth. I think that's funny. But we've explored, and populated most of the landmass on Earth except for parts of Antarctica. And working to study the oceans. We're working to get to the moon. We're working to go to Mars. We've explored our solar system with robotic probes. This seems to be a natural thing for us to do. And it certainly is tied to survival. If you're resilient enough to be able to live in different climates, that resiliency is going to assist your survival, increase your survival probability. And so certainly colonizing Mars is, as Elon Musk has pointed out, it gives us 2 planets to live on. It doubles our chances of survival. And I think that any species that does this or can explore and is that resilient is going to just keep reaching out and keep going. And the stars are the next natural place to go.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Let's break down your work that you've been doing on estimations of UAP speeds and accelerations, and how it possibly relates to some estimates that were done in the 1950s as well.
Right. So, as kind of when I decided that I really wanted to study these things, you are immediately run up against the problem in that there is a paucity of data. There really is no data to work with. You mostly have anecdotes to work from, and their reliability is questionable, and that's a fact and concerning. So what I did was thought, well, let's get some idea of what we're probably dealing with here. And this is really, I basically, my first paper on this was basically me doing my homework as a physicist. What are we looking at here? Let's get some estimates of how these things move. How anomalous are they? Are they flying at hundreds of miles an hour, thousands of miles an hour, tens of thousands of miles an hour? At this point, it's not clear until you actually look at this. So the only thing you do have to work from is anecdotal data.
Sure.
We like to call it anecdata. Now, of course, a lot of overly skeptical scientists will then question every anecdote that's ever been reported, and in some cases, things are questionable, but there are some cases where you can legitimately ask, how wrong could the observers have been? And especially when it comes to professionals like fighter pilots. Fighter pilots are well trained. Tens of millions of dollars go into their training. They have thousands of hours of flight experience. They're trained to be able to identify, to be able to spot and identify aircraft at different distances. They're trained to be able to estimate those distances. This is all very important for the life of a fighter pilot. And so when a pilot sees something anomalous like this and reports it, you can legitimately ask, how wrong do you think they can be? So this tic-tac shaped object, that was observed in the 2004 Nimitz encounters, the pilots all estimated it to be about the size of an F-18. So this is about 40, they estimated about 40 feet in length, and F-18 is like 50 feet, 57 maybe. So really, how wrong could the pilots have been? Could these have been 4-foot long craft, as some people have claimed, little drones? Well, you're not going to see a 4-foot long craft from 20,000 feet. A lot of the problems with a lot of this over-skepticism is it relies on cherry-picking the data, cherry-picking the anecdata that they're being presented. And they explain one little aspect of that, and their explanation doesn't at all extend to the other examples. So that's really problematic. So no, these things couldn't have been 4 feet long, and they very probably were around 40 feet. Could they have been off by 10%? Certainly.
Right.
So yeah, they could have been anywhere from 36 feet to 44 feet. Fine. Could they be off by 20%? Possible, right? So, so we're looking at somewhere between 30 feet and 60 feet, right? So, so I think you can make some reasonable statements, and that was what we attempted to do in that paper. And of course, we chose 4 cases where there were either additional data or the videos or some other kind of confirmation. So the first case we looked at was the 1951 encounter with Graham Bethune off the coast of Newfoundland. And in that case, they had a large metallic disc that they estimated to be 300 feet across.
Wow.
Came up from either below the ocean surface or at the ocean surface, down near the surface, came up to their altitude in a fraction of a second at 10,000 feet, right? So
right.
So you're basically going from vertical rest to accelerating, and then you have to decelerate to stop, right? So,
sure.
So you can put a bound on the minimum acceleration that you would need to do this. And that's what we attempted to do in that paper. So that paper estimates the minimum acceleration. So the minimum acceleration happens when you accelerate from 0 with a constant acceleration to the midpoint, and then you decelerate with the same acceleration till you stop.
Okay.
That gives you the minimum acceleration. Can you traverse this distance any differently? Well, of course, you could accelerate at a super high rate and then travel at a very high constant speed till you get to the top, and then decelerate at a much higher rate. But that's a higher acceleration than the one where you accelerate to the midpoint and then decelerate the rest of the way. So all of the estimates we made are understood to be minimum accelerations.
Okay.
And and that's an important point. And then the idea was that these cases, they probably couldn't have been off more than about 10%. So we used something like a 10% error in all of these cases.
Right.
So for the case with Graham Bethune craft, the most probable acceleration was estimated to be about 1,700 times the acceleration of gravity. So you're looking at 1,700 times acceleration of gravity, and which is crazy. You don't expect to see things like that, right?
No.
So how wrong would the pilots have to be for that acceleration to be more reasonable? Maybe 1.7 G acceleration would be reasonable. 17 would be too high. At 13.5 G, you start ripping wings off airplanes, even our fighter jets. So 17 would be too high. So you're looking at a minimum acceleration is estimated that is 1,000 times more than what's reasonable.
Unbelievable.
And it's unbelievable, and it's going to be very hard to explain that away in any conventional means. Either that or the pilots have to be extremely mistaken, which is hard to imagine that you can be mistaken to that degree, or just lying. But then you have a plane load, and actually other passengers saw the thing too. So you've got a plane load of passengers who witnessed the object as well. So, and then they estimated it to leave the thing, then took off after some period of time flying around the plane for a few moments. And they estimated its speed to be something like 1,000 miles an hour, and it was actually picked up on radar by a radar station in Nova Scotia, where they estimated the speed. Yeah, it was the Gander Center radar I'm reading on my paper, actually, Newfoundland, Canada. And they confirmed, so they estimated its speed to be about 1,500 miles an hour as it left. But Gander Radar Center actually measured its speed at 1,800 miles an hour. So this thing was, very fast. Now, that's important because this happened in 1951. And later in the year of 1952, you had General Slade Nash was flying an F-86 Sabre, D Sabre, and he made the airspeed record in 1952. The world airspeed record in 1952 was 698 miles an hour.
Right.
So that's the world speed record 2 years after this event, and the pilots estimated this thing leaving at 1,500 miles an hour, and it was actually measured by radar to be leaving at 1,800 miles an hour.
Wow.
And as Desi Narnes says, you've got a lot of splaining to do. You really do, and you can't easily dismiss all of these cases.
Yeah.
And so we looked at the Japanese airline case. In 1986, we looked at the 2004 Nimitz encounters, and there we had we had three different ways we could estimate accelerations and speeds. One was using the information from Kevin Day about the senior chief Kevin Day on the USS Princeton.
Yeah.
With the radar data where he had observed these things dropping from 28,000 feet to sea level in 0.78 seconds. So again, you can estimate the minimum acceleration there. And in that case, you're talking over 5,000 Gs of acceleration. That's a lot of acceleration.
Yeah.
And to give, our machines can't survive that, much less people or biological organisms. So this is very, very strange. These things are really anomalous. They're not just slightly anomalous or weird. They're beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the 3 Navy videos that we all know so well, did you use them to try and do analysis as well?
It's difficult because because you don't have to obtain an estimate of the acceleration, you have to have some idea of either the distance to the object or the size of the object.
So like triangulation of some sort.
Yeah, you need some known distance so that you can get an acceleration from that, because an acceleration is a distance divided by time squared. So you need a distance. And in the Nimitz case, we were able to use the 40 feet estimates that the pilots made. Now, you can be critical of that, and that's fine. But then the task is to take, if you don't believe in those lengths, then take the length that you do believe in, and then see what the acceleration is. So we've had people, I had said somebody claim, well, what if they were 4 feet long? Well, do the math. The math is actually the equations are in the paper. You can plug it in. But if it was 4 feet long instead of 40 feet long, then instead of, flying away from the F-18 at 78 G, it would have been accelerating at 7.8 G. So now you've got to explain a 4 foot long drone that can't possibly be that far in front of the airplane. That's basically keeping pace in front of the jet airplane at about 250 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And then accelerates away at 7.8 G. And then this is an infrared video. So where's the exhaust from the propellant or the thrust? So even if this thing, did escape at 7.8 G, which is surprising, but not horribly unreasonable. A missile can accelerate much faster than that. But then you'd expect to see some exhaust, and you don't see an exhaust.
Yeah.
And then of course there are the claims that, the go fast video wasn't actually going very fast. Well, that's fine. It's one of the problems with these things is that UFOs aren't always going very fast. Sometimes they stop and they hover or go at very slow speeds where you can't stay aloft without some additional form of propulsion to provide lift. So that's also problematic. The go fast video is the one with the little white dot that's cruising along the sea surface, which, because of parallax, it looks like it's going really fast. So it's a fun video to watch. But people have claimed that, it's probably just a seagull. And now that's also silly, because you have the fact that this is an infrared video. And if you look at the lower left corner of the video, that it says either WHT or BLK, and that says that either white is hot or black is hot. So through most of the video, when you can see this little white thing cruising along, it says BLK, which means black things are hot. So this white thing is actually cold, and it's colder than the sea surface.
Right.
Seagulls aren't colder than the sea surface. So that's also ridiculous. So again, we see these. I'm extremely skeptical of a lot of the explanations provided by skeptics.
Yeah, I think quite a few of us are, but I think it's one of them conversations that just will keep going around in circles for the time being. Or
yeah, it will until there is enough independently recorded data, and once scientists start studying this openly, I think that the conversation will have to change. The scientific community will have their own discussions, and skeptics can complain all they want, but the skeptics will fall into the same class as the flat earthers. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, mentioning the scientific community, we've seen a lot more of it come to the forefront especially in the last year.
Yeah.
But in your experience, have you seen the stigma drop over that sort of time? Are the conversations happening now where they wouldn't have been a few years ago?
The stigma has dropped, and I think that, I would have to credit Lou Elizondo for coming out about ATIP and the U.S. Navy going to Congress for assistance. I think those two events were absolutely enormous. We didn't get the kind of disclosure, UFO people didn't get the kind of disclosure that they were hoping for. But what did change is it provided some legitimacy to the phenomenon. And that's really the most difficult barrier to get over. When you're trying to study something new, usually in science, what you're doing is you're not trying to prove something's true. You're trying to either rule out possibilities by showing these things aren't true, other things aren't true, that these things aren't explanations, or you are trying to characterize, the phenomena that you're studying. And that's one of the differentiating features between pseudoscience and science. In pseudoscience, people are typically trying to prove something's true, which is not really how we work in science. So it's one of those features that is, for scientists, is kind of a red flag that suggests, oh, this looks like pseudoscience. Now, the problem with a new phenomenon, like UFOs were to the collective consciousness in the 1940s, is that you had to first show that this is a real phenomenon that you can study.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of the early work has to be to prove that this is a real phenomenon. And that activity looks to scientists a lot like pseudoscience. So, and in the 1940s, that's not when UFOs started at all. We have UFO reports go back well into this 1800s, 1700s, and in some of those cases, they were actually published in scientific journals, astronomy journals. Yeah, because they were astronomical phenomena, right? And but by the time we get to 1947, and actually 1947 was unique in several ways, in that you had in June and July of 1947, you had multiple prominent sightings that were reported.
Yeah.
And by the late 1940s, you have global news, which didn't exist certainly in the 1800s, right? So you had radio, you had television, you could propagate stories like this much faster.
Right.
And we were much more organized in doing that. So that's really when UFOs came into the public consciousness. but they've been here throughout human history. It really appears, and if you think about that fact, so I mean, so the first event you had the sightings at Mount Rainier of
Kenneth Arnold.
Kenneth Arnold. Yep,
Yeah.
Kenneth Arnold was seeing the saucers at Mount Rainier. You then had the Roswell crash. You had the event at Puget Sound. Those were all in July of 1947. You also had two other crashes, it seems, in New Mexico. The one at Corona, and then the one at San Agustin Plains. So you've got a lot of activity going on in 1947. So that's really when we became aware that, wow, there's something interesting here. And at the time, the extraterrestrial hypothesis really does seem ridiculous, because 1947, you were still 10 years out, 10 years before Sputnik.
Yeah.
So we were not flying in space. Nobody flew in space in 1947. It was not known that it was possible, really. And in fact, up until 2 weeks before Sputnik, the Astronomer Royal of the UK had made a statement that space travel is bunk. He said this 2 weeks before Sputnik. So many scientists did not believe that space travel was possible or reasonable, even in 1957, right, before Sputnik. But this is back in 1947. So now you've got the hypothesis, maybe these are visitors from another planet, but most scientists don't believe you can not sure you can actually travel in space. And then the next point is, we didn't know what the other planets are actually like. We had some idea of what their atmospheres were like, but that we hadn't actually sent, of course, we hadn't sent probes to Mars yet, or any of the other planets. So we don't actually know what the other planets are like. We don't know if they can support life. We knew that the moon couldn't at this point. We knew that there was no atmosphere on the moon. So, and then we didn't know that there were planets around other stars. We didn't discover planets around other stars until the first one or two were discovered in the 1990s. So another 50 years later, right? So there was really no scientific basis for the extraterrestrial hypothesis in 1947. So you can see why that didn't fly in 1947. And then the topic became taboo because it just seemed so ridiculous. You had 10 years for it to become ridiculous. You got the 1952 wave, again, 5 years before Sputnik. And so by this time, the whole topic was taboo. And so once we started flying in space, and it's been hard for us to recover from that, that predisposition. We've all been told since we were kids that UFOs are not real and they're ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And that's interstellar travel is impossible and blah, blah, blah. And it's not actually, but we're working on it. We're working to develop interstellar craft. NASA has a plan to get the first probes to the nearest star, Alpha Centauri, by 2069 for the 100-year anniversary of the moon landing. So
wow, that's incredible.
We're also new. We're also rather arrogant. We're rather new at flying. I mean, we've only been flying for a century.
Yeah.
And for us to then mentally put bounds on what's possible and impossible is really pretty ridiculous. Lord Kelvin in the late 1800s said that heavier than air flying machines are impossible. And so that was the late 1800s. So physicists are very bad at predicting engineering advances. And the reason why is because the whole point of engineering is to come up with a clever way to use physics to work around problems, right? So you can't use the fact that there's a problem to limit your expectations of what engineering can and can't do. The trick is to find a workaround, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, there's been a lot of hypotheses flying around, and even probably more so these last few months and this year. But I believe you've actually got a favored hypothesis that it's similar to even NASA, the NASA administrator, Bill Nelson. You know, he's said a lot of things on the matter recently, and I think your hypothesis ties into that. Can you break that down for us a bit?
For what do you mean with regard to the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or
I don't know. I just see that you have a favored hypothesis, and I think something you wrote somewhere is that it's similar, or it falls in line with some of the things that Bill Nelson has recently sort of spoken
I
about.
said yes, yeah. So right. So I think that at this point it's rather clear that it's rather well established that these things are probably that some of these things are craft. Now, of course, not all unidentified flying objects are alien spacecraft or craft at all. Some of them very possibly could be aerial phenomenon or atmospheric phenomena that hasn't been studied yet or hasn't been recognized. So that's already, so there's a few complications in discussing this phenomenon because it's not clear whether it's known that it's not a single phenomenon. There are multiple explanations for different events. Yeah. So two sightings are, can't necessarily be compared. So, but it's clear that some of these things are craft, and from what we know about their speeds and accelerations is that there's no way that these are human-made craft. There's no country on Earth that can do this, no known company that can do this. And I think what's interesting is Bill Nelson pointed out that we should be thankful that there's no country that can do this because it would be disastrous. At these accelerations and speeds. And I didn't get to mentioning the speed. The speed in the case of the 5,000 G acceleration, in the Nimitz case, when the Tic Tacs dropped from 28,000 feet to sea level, the top speed about halfway down is about 45,000 miles an hour. So this thing accelerates from 0 vertical speed to 45,000 miles an hour in about a third of a second, and then a little more than a third of a second, and then decelerates to 0 in another third of a second. Yeah. And 45,000 miles an hour is about how fast the New Horizons probe that we sent to Pluto is going. Wow. So when people ask me, well, why do some people think these things are spaceships? And the answer is simple. Because they move at speeds that spacecraft move. That's it. They're completely reasonable to think that they could be spaceships because they move at the requisite velocities. And so I think that's very simple. So it really does appear that these things could be spacecraft. If they could maintain these accelerations in a vacuum, they could easily reach relativistic speeds, speeds close to the speed of light in very reasonable periods of time, within a few hours, typically. Right. Depending, of course, on the acceleration. Yeah. So, and I think the interesting thing that Bill Nelson pointed out at, so at these speeds, so 45,000 miles an hour is about Mach 60. And the, wow, I'm spacing on what I was going to say precisely, but all right. Yeah. So at that speed, you can get from New York to London in around 5 to 10 minutes. Wow. So, load one of these things with nuclear weapons, you can get anywhere in the world in less than an hour, which gives almost no time for preparation, if they're for an attack. So you can't. So it would be very dangerous if another country or our country, if anybody's country had these objects and with these capabilities. So that may very well be the angle that our government needed to disclose the fact that these things are non-human technologies while making sure that people don't panic.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah, they're non-human technologies, and you should be glad, because humans are really scary. And if humans had these, we should be. If the Chinese had these, or the Russians had these, or the Americans had these, whoever you happen to be, you would be worried. So, but thank God the people don't have this technology, and I think that's maybe that seemed to me to be an out for them, right? And
Yeah,
a chance for them to disclose some of this without people panicking.
absolutely.
And so the other interesting thing, the other thing is that the language has changed slightly. They've gone from calling them possibly alien or extraterrestrial to non-human.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I picked up on that from another source as well. And the the question then is that, well, why that language change? Extraterrestrial would typically mean they come from another planet.
Sure.
So if you're changing it to non-human, you're either being more careful and not making an assumption about where they're from, because we don't know, or maybe you do have some information about where they're from and you know that they're not from another planet. So it's one or the other. And I
Right.
think that latter possibility is interesting, because so once I realized how fast these craft move, it made me think about interstellar travel more. How could that work? What would actually be necessary to be an interstellar traveling race? And so I had done some simulations of interstellar colonization,
Right.
and I had aimed to publish these, but it's just not to that point yet. There was some work done by some other astronomers where they had done something similar. They'd done some similar simulations and got similar results, but they took into account the fact that the stars in the galaxy are moving. And I didn't account for that because I had a different goal in mind. So, and I needed to do lots of simulations. So I ended up doing several million simulations of interstellar colonizing societies. And what I did is I kept track of the ones that found Earth. So I ran several million of these. I kept track of the ones that found Earth. And then I could do statistics on their characteristics to figure out what characteristics are necessary for finding Earth. And and so the results, and I'll call these preliminary results, they're interesting, because first it's clear that finding Earth is hard to do. And it's, in my simulations, it was coming out to be about 1 out of 8 million civilizations that are active in colonizing interstellar
Right.
or colonizing star systems. Only 1 out of 8 million ever finds Earth.
Wow.
So that suggests already that if anyone has ever found Earth, if we can ever prove that there have been extraterrestrials here, then there have got to be on the order of over 1 million interstellar colonizing civilizations in our galaxy. So take that Drake equation. You can.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a whole other level, right? So yeah, so I'm now working on beefing up my simulations and making them more accurate so I can get better numbers, and I'd like to publish that. The other interesting things are that the speeds you need to attain aren't horribly great,
Right.
depending on how resilient you are about being able to set up a base or some kind of home or live on a planet in another star system. If you're very resilient, then you can travel at speeds as low as, 10% the speed of light or 20% the speed of light, which is still for us unattainable. But
of course,
but but you can then perform interstellar colonization if you're very resilient in those cases. Now, of course, in most of my simulations, I think it was like 60% of the societies never left their solar system.
right.
So that's why you have to run lots of simulations, right? And then the ones who do, still 1 out of 8 million find Earth. So you've got to run even more.
Wow.
Right. So now so the ones that did find Earth, you can estimate about how long ago they found Earth, and that turns out to have an average of about 200,000 years. So on average, so if an extraterrestrial system civilization finds Earth, then they probably found Earth about 250,000 years ago. So they've probably been here or known about Earth throughout human history.
Wow.
Now, interestingly, that tracks with what we see, with UFO reports, because you've got flying shields reported by Roman historians and things like this. So this has been going on a long time. And so very possibly, if these are extraterrestrial, it's very possible they found Earth a long time ago. Now, there's some consequences to this because there are those who colonize, and then there are those who are colonized, right? Those
Right.
who are on the business end of colonization find things to be rather difficult. The colonizers typically believe that they own what they find, right? I mean,
Sure.
look at how Europeans feel about North America, right? This is our country, right? We found it. It's ours, right? So, and then you have all the people who are on the business end of colonization who are like, whoa, wait a minute. No, that's not how it should work. But we could very well be in a situation where these peoples have discovered Earth 200,000 years ago, and they really, truly believe it's their planet.
Yeah.
There could be bases here. They could live here. And I really suspect that's probably more likely than visiting. Carl Sagan had pointed out at one point, I think correctly, he said, I'd be surprised if you had multiple ships visiting our planet every year. Interstellar travel is going to be relatively difficult still, but so why would you have multiple ships visiting per year? And I think the answer to that is they're not visiting. They live here. I think that's probably the most likely situation at that point. And that also could very well be why they've been termed non-human at this point. It could be that we may have evidence that they do live here.
Yeah.
When you consider their responses to military activity, so, the Soviets had used military activity to try to lure UFOs in or UAPs in. And so they would move ships and military equipment, and, within 24 hours, they've got UFOs. Well, those UFOs aren't coming from another star system. They're coming from our star system. So they're here already. And
yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, that's one of the big hypotheses, that they come out of the oceans, or they, or they're in a dimension that is close to us that we just cannot see, as a human being.
So I think that's probably the case. And I think that, their activities with our nuclear weapons and their interference in military operations, which has been increasing since the 1940s. It suggests to me, my concern is that they see this planet as theirs, and we've probably had this great relationship for throughout human history.
Right.
They left us alone for the most part, except for all the probing that maybe happens. But they've left us alone for the most part, and we didn't know they existed. So it worked, right? But now, since 1945, we've developed weapons that really are a danger to not just ourselves, but the planet and
Right.
anybody else who lives here. So we could very well be seen as a threat to the health of this planet at this point. And you could have a situation where they feel, all right, now we need to do something, so what can we do? Maybe we can go shut down some of these missiles. Maybe that'll get them to do the right thing or spur them on a bit. But I suspect that that one of my questions now is that I'd like to know, is there any evidence that they have problems with climate change, that they are working against our activities that um, exasperate the problem of climate change?
Right.
And that I don't know, that I'm talking to friends about, seeing if we ever had any evidence of this, because if there is, then it's very possible that we're going to come to some kind of bumping of heads where they're like, whoa, you guys, you can't do this, you can't do that, you got to calm down and listen. And humans are very bad at being told what to do.
Yeah.
So so I suspect that we might have some trouble, and it could very well be that we're the ones in the wrong. But
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm just
but,
going to give a
but,
quick
but
shout
it
out,
could be
Mr.
messy.
Calhoun. Oops, sorry. Mr. Calhoun, one or multiple phenomena, the immune system failure of an officer in the Varginha case suggests that contact with actual foreign chemistry happened. Yeah, absolutely. We've heard of that in many aspects of the phenomena over years in certain cases. So yeah, it's more than likely isn't just one type of entity, being, whatever you want to call it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
there could. I mean, that's really an interesting point, and the fact that if they're non-human, they might not be all the same species or even from the same civilization. We don't know.
sure.
We don't know what the situation is at this point, and and that's certainly true for the craft. So when people talk about their theories of how UFOs fly, well, that's messy, because there are different kinds of UFOs, and they very well, and it does appear that they use different technologies at different times for
Right.
propulsion. So a single craft may use multiple technologies for propulsion and lift, and different craft could very well use different technologies. We've I'm working on collecting evidence for this, and that really does appear to be the case. It's kind of like, you go grab a car off the highway. Is it a gasoline powered car? Is it a diesel car? Is it an electric car? They're different.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
you have to be careful not to overgeneralize when you're trying to really study the physics of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the work that you're doing now and the papers that you're saying you're wanting to publish, do you have a time scale for those at all?
Um, Probably I'd like to in the next year. We'll see how it goes. There's always so many things going on, so things get pushed off sometimes and picked up again, and it just is how it works.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, also, before we go, I'd like to talk about UAPx because I believe you're now the vice president. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So, I mean, that must, take time out of your day as well when you're doing that. So, can you tell us how that came about and what you're doing for or with UAPx, let's say?
Right. So UAPx is a nonprofit organization focused on openly studying UAPs. We want to learn about these things. We want to find out what they are, what they're like, how they work, all of that good stuff. We want to collect data on them, collect imagery and other data, and the idea is to make it publicly available so that it can be studied by scientists. And that's basically what we're doing. We have had some success in collecting data already,
Right.
and we are currently going through that data and analyzing it ourselves. And once we've gone through it and cataloged everything, our plan is to put it all online. So we have several hundred hours of infrared video footage. Um, and we have multiple captures in during that time frame, and other instruments as well, and other data from other instruments as well. So that's what we're up to at UAPx, and we have a donations link. So I'm gonna unabashedly
Yeah, please do
announce that. So
and
please.
I'll make a note of it, because I'll put it in the description below as well, so people can go
Right.
to it after the fact as well.
Yeah, so any little bit helps at this point, because that's all we have is a little bit, and and we can't. There's no possibilities for federal funding yet. So so right now we rely on donations, which would be great, and we're working on, at this point, we're working on analyzing the data we have and getting that to the point where we can make it publicly available. And then we are also working on designing new instrumentation.
Brilliant. That's excellent. I've just got a couple of questions which were sent to me through Instagram, if you don't mind me just quickly asking those.
Of course.
So Jonathan asks, can you ask Kevin his thoughts on the recent future human narrative taking hold? I believe he suggested this possibility some time ago in a podcast.
Yeah, no, that's, at this point, all hypotheses have to be on the table, because we really don't know what the situation is. And that's certainly an interesting hypothesis. I would feel, I'm more hesitant to accept that solely on the basis of time travel in the past being incredibly difficult theoretically, and and so as a physicist, I find that harder to accept than the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or the idea that there are non-humans living here. And in that spirit, I also find the multiple dimensions to be even less probable. Right. So.
No, that's interesting. I think it's like you said, all things need to be on the table until we can answer something definitively. So, yeah. Right. And then finally, LDN asks, at the recent AIAA conference in August, one of your slides featured a FLIR video by David Mason showing a trefoil-shaped object following a jet airplane. Can you give us more details on that video? Right.
Yeah, we have this. David Mason, when he was with UAPx, or before he was with UAPx, he was experimenting with his FLIR cameras and he's actually captured multiple UAPs. Wow. And that video is one example that we looked at closely at UAPx, and it is, so you have in the video, you have a I can probably show a still of the image from that, if I can pull it up here. Yeah, so in that video you have a jet airplane that is flying overhead, and we know that it's a passenger jet, and we know what company and what flight it is. Even we were able to figure that out, and it's being followed by a trefoil-shaped object, which is really interesting. So, and it's interesting because at the AIAA conference where I talked about this and presented that imagery, I had also seen the talk by the talk that Ted gave, and he was talking about air safety, and he was talking about shadowing, where UAPs often shadow airplanes.
I think, is that the video there that I've got up on the screen?
Oh, do you have the video on the screen? Let's see. Hold on. That is the video. Yeah. So that's the UAP there. And it was actually picked up on 2 cameras.
Right. Wow.
Right. And when you zoom in on that, it's a trefoil-shaped object. I like to joke that it looks like a Klingon bird of prey. Although certainly hope it's not something like that.
Right.
Certainly, due to the fact that it's following a passenger jet. And when you look at that video, you realize a few things. That airplane is very bright, which the color scale tells the temperature. So the airplane's quite warm. The thermodynamics of our machines is such that they are hot. There's always waste heat. You're going to pick that up in infrared, and that really shows up when you have drones and airplanes and things like this. What's interesting about UAPs is they don't have waste heat very often, or they're at least very cold.
Right.
Whether this is because they've just come in from outer space or what, but they're not heating up when entering the atmosphere either. So it's interesting. They are really anomalous. They're anomalous in multiple ways. And that's another way in which they're anomalous. So that trefoil-shaped object is about 60 degrees below zero.
Right.
And you can see that in the video. And that is, the same temperature on the two cameras. So the airplane was picked up on one camera, but the UAP was picked up on two cameras.
Right. Oh, okay.
It just happened that the plane hit the view of one camera and the other one missed it.
Wow, that's incredible. I'll actually add the link for that video I just showed from the conference. I'll put it in the description below so anybody can go and check it out for themselves. But yeah, I found that very interesting because videos like that, you'd think would be in the public domain, like we see the Navy videos. So yeah, that's really interesting. So, right, well, Kevin, we've gone over the hour mark. Is there anything you wanted to discuss before we leave, or anything you want to finish on?
Wow. No, I mean, I could talk for 10 hours on this, and I have, unfortunately. At least some people would feel that way. So,
well, have you got anything coming up in the near future or in the new year? Anything you're working towards? Anything we can look out for?
Let's see. Yes, I am. Yeah, well, I think what we can look forward to is our FLIR imagery that we've recorded coming out and making that public after we've gone through it all, because we did find some interesting things, which is great fun.
That's very exciting, and I understand that these things can't be really discussed or disclosed until it's been fully analyzed and things like that. So yeah, I respect that completely. Well, finally, I just got to say a huge thank you so much for joining me today and having this discussion. It was fascinating, and maybe a few months down the line, if things change and pick up, you'd come back and we'll talk about what's new.
Once we've gone through our videos, I'm happy to talk about what we found and what we saw.
That'd be fantastic. Well, Kevin, stay in touch, my friend. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for having me. Been a great pleasure.
Bye-bye now. And guys, everyone that's been watching, thank you so much for being here in the chat. Thank you for the kind donations. So much appreciated. And I'll see you on the next one, guys. Take care.